Hello and welcome to PwC Customer Transformation's latest podcast around building trust. PwC's recent market winners research showed that one of the 5 pillars of a successful digital transformation is building trust. And embedding cybersecurity is an important and often overlooked way to do that. So to discuss this, we've got Quinton Pienaar, the head of customer transformation in EMEA for PwC, and Pat Moran, partner in PwC Dublin with responsibility for cybercrime and IT forensics. Thanks for joining us, gents. Now, Quinton, let's kick off with you. What's the role and importance of cybersecurity in a transformation? What should businesses be doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you think of a large transformation nowadays, as an organization really looks to reimagine how they engage with their client, how they take their products and services to market. A large portion of that transformation is technology. And as organizations look to use technology to drive those transformations, to digitize the last mile, and really improve and scale their customer engagement capabilities. Cyber is a big part of that, because the ability to not only do that, but do that securely, to ensure that your clients, when they use your digital platforms, are comfortable that their information will be not only stored and secured, but processed in compliance with the regulation, etc. So giving clients the surety that you've done the due diligence to make sure that you will handle their information well, and that is, I think, critical to a key business transformation nowadays.
Pat, let's swing over to you now. According to PwC's recent white paper, The Evolving Customer Profile of a Winner, one of the 5 most important pillars of a digital transformation that was lifted out saw trust as number 3. Now, how does embedding cybersecurity help organizations build trust as such?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and good to be here. Probably there's an awakening going on at the moment around the world that cybersecurity is not just about something that the chief information officer has to comply with and tick a box on the scorecard every year. We've seen with the massive disruption that has been caused with some of the high-profile attacks recently, the business can be disrupted significantly, but customer information equally can be taken away. And I think customers and clients and corporates are now looking at this threat not just as an IT security tick the box for the CIO, but more for their business and their brand and their reputation. So organizations know that they have to protect that, but organizations know as well that their clients and customers, which is the fundamental part of their business, that they have a duty of care to look after their information and their data belonging to those customers. So pulling those 2 pieces together, the brand and reputation and the duty of care with the customers, helps to embed trust in these kind of transformations.
Well, staying with you, Pat, why then is cybersecurity so overlooked if trust is such a major issue?
Yeah, and it's a shame it is, because I believe that if more organizations actually grasp cybersecurity and build it as part of their DNA and their company strategy, they can actually attract more businesses to them. And we're even seeing, like, across industries, financial services in particular, that clients and customers are now very loyal to organizations that actually say out front that they are secure and they will protect their information and they will apply that duty of care. So I think organizations are really getting their head around that now. When I go and talk to boards, Peter, I find that cybersecurity is still a topic that the eyes glaze over. And the difficulty is that the language and the way it's being presented to the board and senior executives is not that helpful for them to interpret and for them to analyze fully. So we as a security cybersecurity professional have an onus to actually make this a topic that is digestible and consumable for the boards, the senior executives, and customers.
Quinton, let's swing this back to you. So, given what Pat's just said, when do you then start thinking about cybersecurity when you're embarking on a digital transformation? At what point does cybersecurity become an issue?
Yeah. So, Peter, the short answer is it should be as early as possible. And maybe, as I answer that, and just to pick up from what Pat was saying, I'd go, if you think of the complexity of many of these business transformations, and I say business transformations because it is driven by the business. The businesses need to transform either the way they distribute products and services, they deal with their client, whatever the business objective that is trying to be achieved. So you have this program behind that, and you have a number of people. You have your business leaders, you have technology leaders, etc., all involved, and that complex stakeholder group means that often the subject of cyber doesn't come up until a little bit later, because you're focusing on what is it that you're trying to achieve as a business, where you're going, what is the strategy, how do you design that in, what is the operating model that you want, how does the technology make that come to life, and then only later down the line do you start thinking about the implications of security often. But what we see is the sooner you get the cyber skills involved, where they can be part of the strategy and design, really look to not only use cyber technologies and approaches to secure platforms and secure information, but really to make it, to improve in many ways customer experiences. You can design in stuff like identity, which would make your log on to certain platforms far a lot more seamless than having to use your username and password each time. So the earlier you get the cyber folks involved, where you could be thinking of not only the requirements around security, but that user experience you want to create, I think it's cheaper. It's more cost effective. You create better, more robust solutions, and you have happier clients. So again, I think we often the conversation starts too late, but start it as early as possible.
So, Quinton, you mentioned now the notion of an identity. So, talk to us briefly about the role of a digital identity as a key to unlocking a business transformation. What is a digital identity in tangible terms, and how does it improve the customer experience?
So, Peter, I asked you at the beginning of the podcast not to ask me difficult cyber questions. And I'll probably need Pat to help me on that. But I think, digital identities is having and Pat, please, I really need, but would be having a secure source that knows who you are, authenticate you when you're wanting to log in and gain access to different profiles on other platforms. But maybe I'll hand over to Pat, and he'll probably correct me.
Quinton, that's a good definition, and I'll have to hire you into my cyber team if you're ever looking for a job. Come to me. That's a really good start. Let me give you a couple of examples, Peter. So a lot of the banking communities on their online banking have now implemented what they call two-factor authentication. That will probably be known to a lot of your listeners, and that's where they send a separate message to your iPad or to your phone just to make sure that it is you that's there, and then the transaction then is allowed to be processed. Many of the phone manufacturers now have this nice face ID, face recognition, rather than having to put in your PIN and your password. Because as Quinton says, actually security is really important, but if it's cumbersome and it's not user friendly, then users and customers and clients will find ways to get around it. So it's a really fine balance between not disrupting the user experience and making it as seamless as possible, to actually intervening when it's necessary. And I think the financial services industry are probably a bit more advanced than other sectors are, And I mentioned about, getting access to an application with an online banking. A lot of the banks, when you're actually past that stage, you're asked for another prompt if you're making a payment to a third party. So I think that's a really good example of where you kind of calibrate the security to meet against the risk, but also to make it user-friendly and seamless so it doesn't feel cumbersome.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pat. Quinton, let me swing it back to you onto more familiar ground, I think. Let's talk about CRM and common customer-facing systems. What's necessary to, what's the bare minimum to secure that sort of system and process?
Yeah, I mean, I think cyber and security is such a broad subject, but I mean, the basics are controls, right? Making sure that you've got profiles, username, passwords for everybody logging into the system. You can authenticate them. Those users have got only permissions to do what they should be allowed to do, not have full system access where they can configure and see unfettered data, unfettered access to data. So those are the basics around. Make sure that you're using profiles, access to segmented data, and that type of thing. So then further on, and even the word CRM nowadays is such a difficult thing to define, because if you look at many of the CRM platforms, they've got everything from sales tools, which is where they come from, often service call center type functionality, commerce, marketing. And then you start seeing, it's that integration piece. So securing the integration piece is where data is moving and information is moving between your sales function and your marketing function for engagement, making sure that you have the correct processes and governance in place as you do that as well. Identity, which we've touched on, I think is a great example of a good way to implement security and improve the customer experience. So, and I'll maybe ask Pat to elaborate, because those are the basics that I think you should have in place. But it's such a broad world that there's many more: data leak protection, etc. that you consider.
Could I, Quinton, just add another layer to it, because that's a really good foundation. There's a piece, Peter, that we're seeing more and more organizations get exercised about, and quite rightly so, which is around privacy. And this is where, particularly for a CRM implementation, you're going to naturally have a lot of personal data and probably quite sensitive information as well, in terms of cookies and preferences and, key indicators about the behavior of a customer. And customers need to know that that's being recorded safely and securely, and that it's not going to any third parties for other processing that they don't know about. So these are the kind of issues and the kind of questions that I believe organizations need to be asking themselves very early on in some of these implementations. And I think, again, if there's a learning or a lesson for some of the organizations that I've been working with, it's actually to get those questions worded the right way early on in the design process, so that those risks can be managed. And I think it's a really good example of, as Quinton says, building those checks and balances in very early, because that's where it's most efficient, rather than ramming them in at the end. And to my earlier point, just around framing the right questions to some of those business leaders and third parties in a way that they can understand and interpret, rather than traditionally those privacy questions get wrapped up with regulation and legislation, and becomes quite difficult for the other person to actually interpret and understand what's going on. So that privacy piece, Peter, really important.
Okay. A final question, and I'm going to give you the last word, Pat. What's the return on investment of a cybersecurity play in a business transformation, or is it just one of those necessary costs that you have to consider? Is there an ROI to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I suppose I'd answer it across two fronts, Peter. The first one would be an ROI as we traditionally would know it, where there's a benefit or a financial gain coming. And I suppose from that perspective, a little bit harder to quantify. However, clients and customers now value their personal data. They value what you know about them. And if they feel that when they enter onto your website or start transacting with you online, that you're being a little bit lazy and a little bit careless about their data, and an example would be your cookies policies, etc., then they'll think of going elsewhere. So I think in terms of encouraging and attracting customers in, there's an ROI there. But in terms of the second layer, because I think this is probably the most important one, but it's a defensive one, unfortunately, is around the cost of a data breach. And there's lots of surveys that are now out there that will tell you that getting this area wrong and having a breach of customer data is a significant hit to your P&L account and also to your brand and reputation. And you know, over the last number of weeks, we've been supporting clients where they've had to literally go back to pen and paper. Their whole business in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis has been disrupted completely. They've lost customers. They've got to report to the regulator. They've got to do a lot of remediation, a lot of external reporting. That comes at a very significant cost, albeit a defensive one, and another important decision factor for building cybersecurity in very quickly.
I think we are going to leave it there. Good crack, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks. Thanks.